It's amazing to see how many of us are really quite obsessed with image. I was looking back at some old photograph albums not so terribly long ago and looking what I was dressed like, what I looked like, the hairstyles of the 1970s. And goodness me, it was quite amusing. I looked very different then. I also found a record. Somebody gave me a record. It was by a group called Fascinating Aida. A group of 3 girls. They were quite cutting edge and quite risque, I believe. And I listened to the songs. There's an interesting song. It's about the 3 girls wanting to go and find the ideal man. And one of them had gone off and gone to a party, and she found a 6-foot 3-inch tall man with thick black hair and bright green eyes. And she said this was absolutely the man she'd been looking for. And then when they got home, she found out that he had false teeth, the eyes came out, the hair was a toupee, and in actual fact he had a lip in his shoe. Not at all the ideal that she was looking for. The second one decided to play it safe and got a city man who had a pinstripe suit and a Rolls Royce. Unfortunately, she found out he also had some very strange sexual desires. Not at all what she'd been looking for. The third one found the ideal man, and then she turned around and said, but I couldn't tell him that I had false nails and false eyelashes and that my hair had been dyed. Image is quite important to all of us, and all of us play those sorts of games, and not just for finding partners. We also play those games because we, for instance, look at people with grey hair, and all of a sudden we say to ourselves, that person must be quite old and wise. Now that's because, in theory, grey hair comes with age, and with age comes wisdom. Is it always true? I don't know. But what about that old one of glasses? People wear glasses, are intelligent people because they read so much they hurt their eyes. Interestingly enough, I know people who actually have had glasses made up with plain glass in them because they thought they were such a fashion accessory, or they looked slightly more intelligent, and so on. The truth underneath it is anyone's guess. But we are always into this idea of looking at people and trying to judge who they are, what they are. And because of that, image has become quite important to us. And it goes right through our art and our literature. So, for instance, it's no great surprise that the angels are beautiful creatures in heaven, and yet when they're thrown out of heaven, their wings melt away and they become like bats' wings, dark and horrible and spiny. And they take on the visions of animalistic nature, so no longer beautiful creatures, but they start to grow claws and horns and teeth, because they take on the worst parts of nature, those which are no longer rational, no longer helpful, no longer loving. They take on those aspects of nature which are cruel and unkind. And we do, of course, sometimes take that image to extremes in our art and in our literature. So, for instance, Shakespeare wrote about Richard III, and he made Richard III a hunchback. Why did he make him a hunchback, you must ask yourselves? Well, in some way or another, it had been decided that if you had some form of physical deformity on the outside, it probably mirrored a similar deformity on the inside. So by making dear old Richard III into a hunchback, it was a big clue that he was not a nice person. And it carries on with things like people didn't like left-handed people. If you were left-handed, it was sinister, to do with the darkness, and therefore you were to be suspect. Hence, for many years, people tried very hard to make sure that left-handed people actually adopted their right hand. Interestingly enough, if you were either physically impaired or if you were left-handed, in some parts of the church you were not allowed to be ordained. It was considered that this was a sign of God's displeasure on you, or a sign that you were not worthy to be ordained. Of course, a lot of those images nowadays are in the past, so instead of actually criticising people for being left-handed, we actually create gadgets and things so that they can actually live their lives to the full. And instead of believing that people with impairments are in some way picked out by God to say they're wicked, we perhaps listen to what they have to say and begin to find out who they are, rather than trying to judge them. But image, whether it's silly, whether it's by common nature, or whether in actual fact we overdo it, is very important to us. And image and revelation are what the readings this morning are about. Jesus was transfigured. He wasn't transformed, he was transfigured. And that means we see Jesus as an ordinary human being, but all of a sudden, glowing through that is a revelation of what he truly is. So with the three ladies, they found out their young men were not what they wanted. Here we see Jesus in a sort of reverse role, because all of a sudden, instead of being human, we get a glimpse of the divine, a transfiguration, a revelation of what Jesus really is. And in that revelation, several things are being juggled all at once. We see a glimpse of the divine, the light from heaven, that which transforms all things, is a light to all people, is a warmth, is a radiance. We see also a link with that through the whole history of the world and the universe. We see it in the person of Moses and in the person of Elijah. The law, the prophets, come to their fullness in Jesus himself. There are interesting things about that meeting on the mountain. For instance, there's a debate as to whether in actual fact Elijah and Moses were merely visions as opposed to the real Elijah and Moses. Why is that important? Well, some people believe that the souls of the dead slumber until the great day of awakening. Other people reckon that the great day of awakening is with us as we speak in some other dimension, because time in itself is not governing God and what he's doing. Interesting debate, but not what we're here to talk about particularly this morning. And look again at what happened with the disciples. They immediately fell down and worshipped and said, "Can we build 3 dwelling places for you here? Can we idolize you? Can we look up to you and worship you?" And Jesus said, "No," and actually came down and touched them, because he wants to be with us, part of our lives. He stands at the side of us, not distant to be worshipped in that respect, still worthy of worship, but nevertheless with us. Interesting sort of meeting, saying all sorts of things. But that meeting was about revelation. It was about the disciples seeing Jesus for who he was, the God within him, the God which contains all things, for a brief moment shone through and was connected with all time. Transfiguration. Well, imagine what it would be like if each and every one of you was transfigured here and now. Imagine there's a great big screen hung above my head, and imagine for a brief moment your life was projected onto that screen. You were transfigured and shown not as you are sitting there now, but all the things that you have been, all the things that you will be. I suspect it would be a very mixed bag of a transfiguration. I very much doubt there would be one true light shining out. I suspect there'd be little lights here and there, the good things that we've done, the good deeds we've done. There are probably things which embarrass us terribly, maybe things that we're also ashamed of. Because if we are transfigured and simply shown for what we are, it's a pretty worthless thing. Because we also have to be transformed. Jesus doesn't have to be transformed. He's already in a state of perfection. For us, when transfigured, we have to change and be transformed. And it's the power of Jesus himself to begin that transformation, to begin to help us to overcome and be forgiven for the shameful things that we've done, to help us to grow into new people so those lights become brighter and those darker patches diminish. We are not only transfigured and seen for who we are and for what we are, but we are also transformed and we are changed. And slowly but surely, in theory, we are changed into the likeness of God. The image and the actuality. Well, how far are we from that image of Christ? How far do we have to travel to become all that Christ wants us to be in his image as part of his radiant glory? Interesting questions. Go back and think of the beginning of the sermon about the many images we put up and how distant those images are very often from the truth. Think about the times we do that in life. We appear to be something, we appear to be someone. Underneath, sometimes we're hurting, sometimes we're crying. Sometimes we're laughing, all sorts of differences between the reality and the who we are. Christ is about laying those things bare, the realities. He's about changing those realities into the fullness and goodness which he wants for his creation. Amen.